I still remember the air first, cold in a way that did not belong to Utah in late autumn. Thin, sour, heavy enough that every breath tasted like limestone and something far older. It clung to the back of my throat long before we reached the mouth of the cave. The missing hikers had been gone for 3 days, and the chances of finding them alive were already dropping when the ranger sent word that someone had spotted torn backpacks near the edge of a remote ravine. I gathered my search team at dawn. 5 people I trusted with my life. 5 people who had never walked into anything like what waited for us below. We reached the entrance just as the sun broke over the ridge. The cave yawning open in the side of the earth looked less like a natural formation and more like a wound carved into stone. I stepped closer, shining my beam inside. Dust floated in the cold air, catching the light like drifting ash. My team shifted uneasily behind me. No one spoke. The silence was thick enough to muffle even the sound of our boots on gravel. I stepped inside. The first thing I felt was the temperature drop. Not gradually. Immediately. A deep cold that wrapped around my shoulders and tightened as we descended. The walls pressed close on both sides, damp and rough beneath my fingertips. Our flashlights carved thin paths through the dark that seemed to swallow the light instead of reflect it. A faint metallic smell drifted toward us from deeper inside. One of my team members whispered, asking if it might be blood. I told him I did not know, but I did. I had smelled it before at accident scenes. This was sharper though. More rotten. More wrong. We found the first sign of the hikers maybe 200 feet in. A torn sleeve. A ripped bootlace. Nothing else. No footprints on the dust-layered floor. No drag marks. Just that scattered gear resting quietly as if placed there by a hand that did not understand the meaning of possessions. We kept moving. The passages tightened. At one point we had to turn sideways to squeeze through a gap no wider than a coat rack. The rock scraped against my jacket, and for a moment I felt the claustrophobic fear rise in my chest. The fear that the cave would close behind us and trap the light with us inside. My team waited in silence while I scanned the next chamber. When I nodded, they filed through one by one. Then we found the claw marks. Thin, deep, dragged across the wall as if something tall had scraped its nails along the stone while moving through. The marks were irregular. Some high enough to suggest a creature standing upright. Others low enough to reveal crawling. They did not look like mountain lion scratches. They did not look like bear tracks. They looked deliberate. They looked impatient. The smell grew stronger. We turned a sharp corner and stopped as one. A low, wet sound echoed ahead. Not movement. Not footsteps. The sound of dripping. Water at first, I thought, until the beam landed on a dark stain pooling between cracks in the stone. It was not water. It was thicker. It clung to the rock in slow threads. We stepped into a wide chamber then. A hollow in the earth large enough to hold a small cabin. Our lights swept across old camping gear. A crushed tin cup. A torn sleeping bag. Burned remnants of a small fire. But the ashes were cold. Very cold. Too cold for 3 days. The hikers had not died there. They had abandoned the space in a hurry or been chased from it. Then one of my team members gasped. The body was curled against the far wall, half hidden behind a fall of broken stone. For a moment I thought it was human. The proportions were close. The head shape was close. The arms and legs were long and thin. But the skin was wrong. Scaled in places. Pale in others. Like something had peeled layers apart. The limbs were too long. The ribs too wide. The hands too narrow. And the chest cavity, partially opened by whatever killed it, revealed something I knew immediately was not possible. The lungs were shaped like ours. The skeleton beneath them was not. I stepped closer, my light trembling. The face was twisted, not in fear but in something like agony. The jaw elongated like a reptile. The eye sockets large. Too large. The neck too flexible, almost snake-like. I felt cold crawl down my spine. Colder than the cave air. Colder than I had ever felt in my life. One of my team members whispered behind me, asking if it could be an animal. Another asked if it could be deformed. I shook my head. No animal had a chest cavity like that. No human had bones shaped like that. The spine itself curved and twisted with a pattern I had never seen in any anatomy book. It looked like something made from two different creatures forced together. The smell thickened. The dripping sound continued. My flashlight traced the source. A wound beneath the ribs, fresh enough that fluid still gathered and fell in slow drops. The creature had not been dead long. I ordered my team to stand back. I forced myself to kneel beside the body. My hands shook as I reached for my radio. I called for backup and a transport team. My voice echoed strangely through the chamber, swallowed by the stone. None of my team wanted to touch the body. They looked at me with wide eyes, as if hoping I would change my mind. But we needed answers. We needed to know if the missing hikers had encountered this thing or if something worse had killed it. We wrapped the body as best we could. Every moment felt like handling something sacred, or dangerous, or both. The limbs bent wrong as we lifted it. The joints moved too freely. Bones shifted beneath the skin as if barely attached. Someone gagged. Someone whispered a prayer. Took 4 of us to carry it out. By the time we reached the surface, the sky had already begun to dim. A cold wind rushed out of the ravine like the earth itself was exhaling. My team loaded the body into a sealed container and sent it with the ranger truck toward the nearest lab station. I stayed behind, staring into the dark mouth of the cave. There was no relief leaving it, only dread. I returned to the station late that night. Mud and dust still clung to my boots when the phone rang. The voice on the other end belonged to a lab technician I had known for years. His tone shook. He asked if I was sitting down. I told him to tell me anyway. He took a long breath. The lungs are human, Sheriff. He paused, then spoke again. But the bones are reptile. The line went quiet. I felt the world narrow to that single sentence. My team stood outside the door, waiting for me to say something. I did not. I could not. Because in that moment I realized something terrible. Whatever we pulled out of that cave, it was not the only thing living in there. And whatever made it was not finished. I did not sleep the night the lab called. Not even for a moment. The words he spoke kept crossing back and forth in my mind, refusing to settle. Human lungs, reptile bones. There was no place in the world where those two things should meet. No universe where they grew inside the same body. Yet I had touched that creature's skin. I had felt the strange flex in its limbs. I had carried its weight. By morning the truth had hardened into something worse than disbelief. It had become responsibility. I gathered the same team and told them we were going back into the cave. No one argued. They only nodded and began checking their gear with quiet, shaking hands. Even the air felt different that morning. The sun was bright over the Utah cliffs, but the shadows near the ravine were colder than they should have been, as if the cave beneath the earth chilled the ground for miles. When we reached the entrance again, the wind pushed outward, warm at first, then freezing in the next breath. It was unnatural. 2 currents fighting each other. Something moving deep below. We stepped in. The darkness swallowed us exactly as before, but this time it felt thicker. Our lights seemed weaker, as if the walls were drinking the glow. The narrow passages that had scraped our jackets the day before felt narrower. The air tasted stranger, metallic with a hint of sulfur. None of that had been present on our first trip. The cave was changing, or something inside it was waking up. We followed our old path down toward the first chamber. The claw marks on the walls were still there, glinting faintly under our lights. But they had multiplied. Fresh scratches ran over some of the older ones, deeper, sharper, as if something had moved through after we left, as if something had returned to search for the body we took. My team slowed behind me. One of them whispered that we should leave. Another suggested sealing the entrance. But I could not leave without answers. Those hikers were still missing. Something had killed the creature we found. Something had torn open its chest not long before we arrived. We pressed deeper. The larger chamber still smelled of blood and dust, but the body was gone. A dark outline marked where fluid had pooled, but the stone beneath it was dry. I scanned the floor and found prints along the edge. Not footprints, not paw prints, something in between. long digits spaced like fingers combined with the curvature of a claw. And there were more than one set. One of my team members kneeled beside them. He exhaled slowly. This is fresh. These were made recently. Maybe hours ago. Another member pointed toward a narrow crack in the far wall. A rock slide had fallen away, creating an opening we had somehow missed in the dust and panic of our first search. A draft of cold air drifted out of it, carrying a scent so strong it made my stomach turn. Old rot, wet stone, and something else beneath it. Breathing, faint, slow, but real. We squeezed through the crack, one by one, scraping our packs and pulling our shoulders tight. My beam caught the edges of another passage, then widened into a chamber deeper than the others. The floor sloped downward into a cavern that stretched so far the light barely touched the walls. The sound inside echoed strangely. Our breaths, our steps, the metallic click of flashlights against stone. But there was another sound beneath the rest. A soft patter, like something moving away from us in the dark. We fanned out, scanning the chamber. Bones lay scattered near the walls. Too long for deer, too wide for coyotes. Some were cracked open, marrow emptied. Some had deep grooves cut across them as if something with teeth far too sharp had shaved them down. My heart dropped when I recognized one piece. A human femur, split along the length. Cleanly carved. Not chewed. Carved. My voice felt thin when I spoke. Someone did this. One of my team answered quietly. Or something. We moved deeper. The walls here were covered in markings. Not scratches. Carvings. Symbols none of us recognized. Lines looping around each other. Spirals. Figures that resembled humanoid shapes with elongated limbs and serpentine bodies. One carving in particular froze me mid-step. A human figure kneeling beside a creature half human and half reptile. The human held a tool. The creature was bound. Another carving showed a taller being standing over both of them, arms raised. Watching, or directing. My breath fogged out in front of me. It should not have been that cold. Not so deep underground. We followed a trail of disturbed sand and dragged debris toward an even narrower tunnel. This one dipped sharply downward. My light slipped into the dark and vanished. I tried the radio for the third time. Nothing but static. But this time the static pulsed in rhythm with a distant sound. Breathing. Closer now. We descended carefully. The tunnel twisted like the inside of something alive. The air grew hotter, then colder again. Pressurized. Wrong. At the bottom we stepped into another chamber, smaller but more detailed. Piles of bone fragments. Animal skins. A nest-like structure built from branches and shredded fabric. I reached toward one piece and recognized the pattern of a hiker's jacket. Then something echoed behind us. Not breathing. Footsteps. Slow. Uneven. Too heavy to belong to a person. My team spun. Flashlights cut across the chamber in frantic arcs. Something moved between the far columns of rock. A silhouette slipping closer. Then another. And another. 3 shapes. Tall. Thin. Limbs too long. Eyes reflecting the light like polished stones. One team member stumbled backward. Another raised their weapon, but their hands shook too badly to aim. I stepped forward, instinct telling me to shield them. But I could not move. My legs felt anchored to the cave floor as those shapes swayed in the shadows. They were not the creature we found. They were alive. And they were studying us. One of them lifted its head, inhaling sharply. Its throat expanded like a reptile drawing scent. Then it made a sound I still hear in my worst dreams. A low vibration, a rattling breath. The sound of something caught between two worlds and belonging to neither. Another creature stepped forward into the full light. Its eyes were human. The skin was not. My team began to retreat instinctively, inching toward the tunnel we descended. The creatures moved in slow arcs, not rushing, not attacking. Just watching, just counting. I whispered, barely able to form words. The one we found was not alone. A shadow shifted behind the 3. Something larger moved in the dark beyond them. The chamber vibrated with its weight. The walls hummed. Dust fell from the ceiling. And then the breathing changed. The three smaller creatures backed away as if yielding space. Something else was coming. We ran. Not out of panic. Out of survival. We scrambled up the tunnel, scraping our knees on the rock, slipping, pulling each other forward. The echoes rose behind us, faster, louder. Not footsteps now. A crawl. A scrape. A dragging rush of limbs too many for the size of a human body. We burst into the upper chamber, gasping. The air felt colder than before. The claw marks on the wall glistened with moisture, as if something had brushed them moments earlier. Then we heard it, a sound rising from the depths of the cave. Not a roar, not a cry, a slow, heavy breath that vibrated the stone beneath our feet. Whatever killed the corpse we found was still alive, and now it knew exactly where to find us. I have spent years trying to put distance between myself and that cave, but distance does not matter when a memory breathes. There are nights when I wake before dawn, lungs tight, heart pounding, and I swear I can still hear the rasp of something dragging itself across stone far below the surface of Utah. No matter how much time passes, the sound claws its way back into my thoughts. Slow, heavy, patient. People have asked why I retired early, why I left the county, why I refused to step near the old search routes. I gave the simple answers: stress, age, fatigue. But none of those were true. The truth waited in that cave. The truth stared at us with eyes that were not human and not animal. The truth followed us long after we escaped. And I have come to believe that if I do not speak it now, it will follow me into the grave. The team that went down with me never spoke publicly of what we saw. 2 of them left the state within a year. One drank himself into silence. Another swore she would never go underground again. Cannot blame them. I carry the same fear, the same guilt. We made it out of the cave that night only because whatever lived in the deepest chamber allowed it. Not because we outran it. Not because we outsmarted it. Simply did not choose us. That is a truth that gets heavier the older I become. Traffic cameras saw us running from the cave mouth, stumbling into the open air like escapees from a sinking ship. Our faces were pale. Our voices broke when we tried to report what happened. And before the sun rose, government vehicles arrived at the ranger station. Black cars without plates. Men who did not introduce themselves. They took the creature's body. They took our photos. They took the cave maps. They took every sample the lab had archived. They sealed the cave. And they did it fast. Faster than anything I had ever witnessed. Concrete was poured into the entrance. Steel plates welded across the cracks. Signs posted claiming structural instability. By noon, the place was fenced off. By sunset, there was no sign a cave had ever existed there at all. We were told to file a report describing a landslide and a decomposed bear. The wording was provided for us. Every line was clean, sterile, empty. Not a single mention of claws that curved like fingers. Not a single mention of scales stretched across a human chest. Not a single mention of those living shapes watching us from the dark. They erased the truth, but they did not erase what it felt like. And that is what haunts me. A week after the cave was sealed, I received a package with no return address. Inside was a small plastic vial. Empty. A smudge of dried fluid clung to the inside. Human blood, or what looked like human blood. Attached to it was a folded note with only one sentence. You were never supposed to open the lower chamber. I burned the note. I kept the vial. Months passed. Seasons changed. But the sense of being watched never left me. Sometimes when I walked near rock formations or narrow canyons, I felt vibrations under my boots. Not earthquakes. Not cars. Something slower. A pulse beneath the earth. And then the dreams started. I dreamt of long tunnels dripping with moisture, of scales brushing stone, of eyes glowing in the dark like twin embers. In some dreams the creature from the cell returned, and I saw the scar across its chest where the cavity had been torn open. In others, I saw the larger one, the one that never showed its full shape, the one whose breath alone could shake a cavern. But the worst dreams were the ones where I heard human voices deep in the cave, pleading, whispering my name. and I woke convinced that the hybrids we found were not born in darkness at all. They were made there, and abandoned. Years passed before I returned near the gorge again. It was a cold afternoon, and snow had begun to fall in thin curtains. I parked near the old access road and stood by the fence. The cave was sealed behind tons of concrete and steel, yet I felt the pressure beneath the earth. Tension. A low hum. Then I saw it. A piece of metal near the corner of the slab. Part of the plate had been bent upward just barely. Not pried by tools. Not cut. Bent outward as if pushed from inside. My breath froze in my throat. I knelt and ran my fingers along the cold steel. Something sharp caught my glove. I pulled back to see a thin scale lodged beneath the edge. Iridescent. Not quite reptile. Not quite anything else. I took it with trembling hands. I never reported it. The government told me to stop asking questions. They told me the cave had collapsed. They told me the creature was classified property. But truth does not collapse. Truth does not become property. Truth breathes. Even now, as I record this confession, I can hear the cave in my mind. The heavy exhale of something that should not exist. The scratching of claws that belong to creatures who were part human, part reptile, and something older than either. I believe now that the hybrids were not monsters. They were not accidents. They were not demons or cryptids or any name we give to the things that frighten us. They were failures, attempts, trials left unfinished in the dark. And the one we found was not the first. It was one of many, some dead, some taken, some still moving beneath the stone. When the lab told me the lungs were human, I felt disbelief, fear, dread. But now, after everything I have seen and everything I have hidden, that moment feels different. It feels like the first time someone let slip an uncomfortable truth. Something in that cave breathed like a man. Something in that cave grew bones like a reptile. And something in that cave is still alive. If I die before someone listens to this, let the world know one thing. The creature in the cave was never the strangest discovery. The strangest discovery was that someone, somewhere, believed it belonged to us. And that someone tried to make more.